Welcome to the 2021 Kinship Town Hall, hosted by the Utah Kinship Coalition. I'm Rich Johnston, Grand Families Program Director and Adoption Program Director at Children's Service Society of Utah, and I'm also the current president of the Utah Kinship Coalition. Coalition member agencies and participants include the Utah Board of Education, Children's Service Society of Utah, LDS Family Services, Utah County Grand Families through Wasatch Behavioral Health, Utah Division of Aging and Adult Services, Utah Division of Child and Family Services, Utah Division of Indian Affairs, Utah Foster Care Foundation, Voices for Utah Children, KDC Law Group, US Dream Academy, along with past and current kinship caregivers and current and past kinship youth. Tonight's town hall is comprised of 4 panelists and a moderator. The presentation will be about 60 minutes. During that time, please feel free to ask questions in the comments section, and we will do our best to get to your questions before we finish the presentation. The panelists for this evening are Judge Anthony Howell of the 4th District Court serving Juab, Millard, Utah, and Wasatch counties, Stephanie Benally, who is the Native American Specialist at the Utah Foster Care Foundation, Debbie and Craig Fisher, who are the adoptive parents of their 3 grandchildren, and Peggy and Carrie Zobel, who are the grandparents with legal guardianship of their 3 granddaughters. Please refer to the Children's Service Society Facebook page for full bios on each panelist. Becky Davis is the Support Services Specialist and Post-Adoption Specialist at Children's Service Society of Utah, and she'll be tonight's moderator. Take it away, Becky.
Thank you so much. I am very happy to be here with all of you today. We spent a lot of time with the Kinship Coalition trying to figure out who were going to be our speakers for this. And when we finally settled on it, I heard so many good things about each of you that it's such a pleasure to be with you here and to be able to meet you and talk to you live in person. So thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise, your experiences, and just hopefully what will come across to our audience is the love you have for the children, not only the families, but also Judge Howell and Stephanie. This is great work to be involved with, and I'm really excited for what we've got coming up today. So I'm going to start with Stephanie. As Rich said, Stephanie is the Native American Specialist with the Utah Foster Care. And so I want to begin with her expertise as far as what she's learned in her role at work about what research has shown about the benefits of kinship care. And for those who maybe don't know what kinship care is, that specifically means basically anyone who is taking care of a relative's child. So usually we see grandparents who are taking care of their grandkids, aunts or uncles who are taking care of nieces for whatever reason. So Stephanie, let's let you talk a little bit about the benefits of kinship care as opposed to maybe foster care with strangers.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to participate on this evening's panel. What research has shown is that there is significant lower behavioral problems and mental health disorders, the better well-being of a child, and less placement disruption in a kinship home. In addition, when a child is placed in a kinship home, a cultural identity is developed. It's a milestone within adolescence. And that it can be achieved in a kinship placement home.
Very good. Yeah, as working with the children who are adopted, I understand their need for connections to their culture and their background. And it's just so heartening that as a state, we're moving more towards kinship care so that kids can keep that. Love it. Thank you so much for your expertise on that. Moving forward now, I kind of want to hear from our kinship families. We've got Craig and Deborah and Peggy and Carrie. And I think I'd like you both to answer this one if it's okay. And it can kind of introduce your story a little bit. I want to know, how did you make the decision to become a kinship caregiver? Were you given time to make the choice? Did it happen suddenly? Tell us a little bit about your story in brief. Who would like to go first? Peggy, are you up? You're muted, so let's hear.
Oh. We can start.
Craig and Deborah, why don't you tell us your situation while Peggy figures out the mute button.
Ours was actually very sudden. We were their grandparents, and And unfortunately, my son had passed away very unexpectedly. Children and youth had become involved. They had asked if we would be a resource for the family should there, they were looking into helping the family, the mother and the children. And all of a sudden we got a phone call on a Friday that they were going in to remove the children in 40 minutes and if we were still a resource.
Oh, wow.
And that was 6 years ago.
I hit a button that
So-
says to speak. And
Oh.
That's incredibly, probably stressful for you to just suddenly be getting kids into your home, even if they are relatives' kids.
It was a lot. We went through a lot of crying, wondering, because, when we would deal with the county, they would say, well, and the kids were comfortable with us, but it was a lot for us because the youngest child in the home at that time was 17. So it was kind of like going from the freedom to 3 in diapers again. And it was a lot. It really was. I mean, looking back now, I can't believe, that they weren't even ours to begin with. But it is amazing and it can be very stressful. So don't feel bad. There were many nights that I have cried. I was crying like, can we do this? We're older. Are we doing the right thing? And to see them now, they're beautiful. They came from, they were exposed to a lot of bad elements. I'm not sure what we're allowed to say, but there was a drug abuse history in the home, mental abuse, the whole realm of things. And what I have found out through this really quickly is that they try to keep families together longer so the children are experiencing more abuse before they are removed. Because they do, I know where we're from, we've seen that. They try to continue to help the family, so it's a longer period of time that they're exposed to it in certain areas. I'm not, if you understand what we're saying there. So
Yeah, when the state is involved, the first priority is always reunification or keeping the families together. And so I can understand that. But yeah, there's always downsides when there's pros. So yeah, that sounds rough. Thank you so much for sharing how you became a kinship caregiver. Peggy and Carrie, do you want to share how you made the decision? What, was it quick? Was it all of a sudden? Was it a little at a time? What happened?
it was a little at a time. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Great.
It was a little bit at a time. My son and his family knew they were struggling because of drugs with him and his wife and asked us for help. And we moved them from Mississippi to Utah and was trying to help them. And they did get out on their own and kind of get a decent start for a while, but they just kept falling back into the drug routine. Ended up back with us. And over time, it just got to where we knew they couldn't be here with the kids. And it's hard because they have the rights to them. We don't. So they could leave and take the kids. My son wanted them to stay with us and be safe, but she wanted her kids. So that was kind of hard to tell her, you can stay here as long as you're going to take care of them and raise them and stay away from the bad stuff. But if you don't do that, the state will take them. So what do you want to happen? And we kind of explained to them that if we took care of them, we would need to have basically like power of attorney or guardianship. And because it kept getting worse and worse, I kind of manipulated the situation to where they had their ID with them and I knew it. And I called an attorney and said, if we come by and they willingly sign the papers, are we good? And he said, sure, if you can get them to. And so we kind of tricked him into basically taking them. But in the long run, it's been the best for them. We've been open to let the parents come and see them and be involved as long as they were clean. And that's been an up and down thing. And that's been hard and hard on the kids. The youngest one wants to see her mother. The older ones understand the situation. They are 10, 13, and 14.
Wow.
And they've actually been with us off and on since 2007 when the first one was born.
It's been a while.
It
It sounds like you and Carrie got really, really good at setting boundaries, which is very impressive. A lot of grandparents in your situation have a really hard time with that, because you are dealing with your own children, and so it's hard to say no to your babies.
My
But
husband will
it
tell
sounds
you
like,
I'm a really good enabler. So it wasn't easy.
oh no. Well, you did it, and I'm proud of you. That's great. All right. Let's hear from Judge Howell. Give us a wave, Judge Howell. We're so glad to have you here.
Nice to be here.
I would like to know, you are the one of the judges for the 4th District Court. And I am sure you see a lot of kinship families coming through seeking guardianship and different legal aspects of kinship caregiving. So I would like to know, how has your perspective changed as you've worked with kinship families? Did you feel one way about them, and then as you kind of got to know the stories, like we've heard Craig and Deborah's and Peggy and Carrie's, did your perspective change at all?
I mean, the short answer is no, not really. So my background, prior to taking the bench, I was a public defender in Utah County for 14 years. So as far as the population that we're really talking about tonight, grandparents with children who have children, and for the parents are struggling at various aspects of their life. That's a population that I'm used to working with. I represented lots of them, and I'm very familiar with difficulties that people have with addiction, all of that. Mm-hmm. I come from a family of my youngest. I'm the oldest of 5 boys in my family. I have an older sister. My youngest 3 brothers are adopted. So we come from I have brothers who went through the foster system and the foster adopt system back in a long time ago. And I also come to this job with the perspective of having lived with my grandparents, not on any kind of involuntary basis or anything like that. But when I graduated a year early from high school and spent a couple of years living with my grandparents, going to University of Utah. And so I had that unique perspective of having that close relationship with my grandparents. So the short answer to your question is no, it hasn't really changed. And but I feel like I am coming at this job and with that what I feel like is some varied experience that gives me some perspective.
Yeah. What I'm hearing from you is that you have maybe a leg up above other, perhaps judges or other people in the legal field in regards to working with families in this situation, because you've lived it yourself, not only with your grandparents, but also your siblings from the foster care system. That is great. I wish everybody had that kind of experience. It really makes you empathetic when you're facing these stories every day. Sure. Let's go back to our families, and then to give you a heads up, Stephanie, I'm going to come at you after that. So you'll be next after that. So the question I want to ask, this one's for Peggy and Carrie. Tell me, well, actually, I'm going to switch that. This one's for Debbie and Craig. Because the kids came into your home so suddenly, what needs did they have when they came into your home? And I'm thinking like both physical needs, emotional needs, any medical needs, anything like that.
We had, I can say, when they came to us, it was nighttime. They didn't have extra clothing. The baby needed bottles. We had to run out and get all that stuff that night as soon as we got them. Also, the next day we had to take them to the emergency room because they were all showing signs of being sick. And at that point, we had realized they had walking pneumonia. They had been exposed to, addiction use in the home the night that they were removed. And also that the youngest, the baby, had never had any vaccinations. She had not been seen by a doctor since the day she left the hospital, and she was just turning a year old.
Oh, wow.
So there was a lot of different things we had to overcome, but you find a way. Your heart just melts. You find a way. You know, they're your family, you love them. So, but it's hard, it's scary. So our grandchildren did get sick. The 2 girls got pertussis, which is called whooping cough. Scary. The CDC actually called our home. We had to take medications, but it's a scary disease that the girls had gotten. And we went through a lot. The first year was really a lot of medical needs, mental health, evaluations, speech therapies. We did a lot of those things. But it was definitely different from raising our children. It gives you a different perspective when you have your grandchildren. There's so many more things that it seems like you sped through with life. And then all of a sudden, when you get your grandchildren, you just enjoy the little things, it seems like, or you notice them more. So, I mean, Craig, you can add to that quickly too.
Another thing that we had a big emotional issue with is because of the issue of the drugs, the SWAT team, and that had to storm the house. So they used flashbangs and all that to enter the house. And for almost 2 years after we got them, for them to see a police officer was devastating. And me being a former police officer, it took a lot of time and effort to convince them that we're the good guys.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it had to happen that way. And over the years, I'm very happy to say now they're like, oh, look, there's a police car. Oh, look, you know, I want to be a police officer when I grow up. So we were able to change it, but it was very emotionally distressful the way they were removed from their home, because the police had to go in and take the house by force because of there was possible drug dealers and all that in the home. So the police couldn't take any other steps but to do it basically by the book with the SWAT team. And that took a lot of re-education and a lot of emotional support for them to be able even to approach a police officer for help, because they just weren't able to grasp it. They were trying to help them by doing what they did.
That must have been so heartbreaking for you as a former police officer to watch that happen.
It was, and it was a very different situation and a different kind of mindset to take to try to reinforce and get them back to, hey, the police officers are the good guys. They're here to help us. And you need to go to them for help and be able to trust them to get help.
Yeah.
And just real quick, if I can add on, it took a lot, because they would see them and my 3-year-old granddaughter would say, uh-oh, it's the police, they're going to get us. We got to watch out. I'm afraid it's the police. So if we saw them, we would try to be like, that's a good thing. You know, they are here to help us and they were trying to help. And now that they know that, it's been a very long time. And just to let you know, it was not in this state. So I don't know how they, different states do different things. But unfortunately, it was a long, ongoing thing. So, but I think they've done a lot better now.
It sounds like you had a very tumultuous first year, just getting everything settled.
Yeah,
getting there
on everyone.
Wow, that is really rough. It can be so hard for caregivers in this kind of situation, not only to meet the physical needs, but to meet the emotional needs, the medical needs, especially if you don't have things in place already, or maybe supports in place for you. And so my next question kind of leads into that. I wanted to ask Peggy and Carrie, once you took the children and it became like official, you had guardianship, they were in your home, what kind of supports were you able to find for yourself to help not only the children with their needs, but also you with your own needs? Because I imagine like it took a toll on your social life. I imagine it took a toll on you financially. Was there any help that you were able to find for either side of it?
Well, I was concerned about the children emotionally and how they were handling it, because the way it thinking back, it really began earlier than when we took them to and got the guardianship. Earlier when the kids were separated, I'll try to make it short. And the parents were separated and they were staying with the mother in a very bad situation. And I tried to get them out of there and couldn't, but then they ended up, they were going to be homeless. And so she let the kids visit and they said, if mom has to live on the streets, will you let us live with you? And I said, sure. You know, I worried that might happen one day. So I've been thinking about how we could make that work and where we would put your bedroom. And they were pretty young then, but then it kind of flopped back and forth a little. The kids never left since then, but the parents came and left. And we probably shouldn't have let that happen. I don't think that was a good decision. But through that, we were introduced to Wasatch Behavioral Health, and 2 of the children were getting some therapy, and that's where we learned about grand families. And that taking the classes that they had helped immensely to transfer from being the grandparent and loving them and spoiling them to having to discipline them and teach them and train them. And it would break your heart because you want to love them and spoil them, but you're having to kind of be the tough guy. And that was kind of hard for me. But we've come around and got them, I think. Now we're going to go into these fun teenage years, and it will be a struggle, but it's a day at a time. But it really helped through grand families and some of their programs they had. We do get a little bit of help through the state for them. But all in all, and it leaves a lot of questions for us in the future. Do we try to adopt them? We're concerned because we're older, we're close to our 70s. And so here we are with these kids, and what's it going to leave them when we're gone?
Yeah, that's a hard thing to be facing. Thank you so much for the testimonial of the Grand Families program, by the way. That we are so proud of this program that we created. And I think a lot of grandparents in your situation are like, oh, we've parented before, we've done this before, we don't need to take classes. So it's good to hear that any kind of education is going to help you become a stronger caregiver.
Families is a great organization, but it's the people that run it is the ones that make it happen. You know,
Yes.
the counselors that's there, the staff that's there, they're the ones that make it successful. I mean, it's phenomenal what they do. The time they spend keeping everybody informed of what's going on, the activities that they have for the kids. And we'll probably never know all the trauma that our granddaughters went through with their parents, seeing what they've seen and knowing what they know. I never had to go through any of that when I was a kid, you know, so I don't understand it. But through their programs, it's kind of helped me, you know, understand what trauma they may have gone through. Don't know how to exactly handle it, but the people at Grand Families is the ones that makes that organization successful.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to talk to Stephanie a little bit and put to use your very unique perspective regarding the Native American community here in Utah in regards to this kinship caregiver issue. So first, I'm hoping that you can answer this kind of quick question about how does the Native American community define kin? Is it different than just, you know, the average person here in Utah, or do they have a broader definition of kin?
They do have a broader definition. So we don't go by the state code. Each tribe makes their definition of what kinship is. So they could look at the clan, they could look at the bands of the person that's an enrolled member of their tribe. So for example, with the Navajo tribe, we have 4 clans. I'm from the Diné Nation. We have 4, well, for myself, I have 4 clans. And so when I go out and meet other people that are Navajo, we can exchange clans to identify how we're related or if we're not related. So again, it is determined by the tribe. And then because per ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act is a federal law, and they defer that definition to the tribe. So when a child does come into care, ICWA will apply to that case, and then that's when the tribe will make that determination if the child is eligible for enrollment or an enrolled member.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. One thing I learned while we were gearing up for Kinship National Kinship Caregiver Month, and I didn't know before, is that there are more kinship caregivers in the Native American population than there are in any other throughout the state. And it had never occurred to me. And so it was really fascinating to learn that. And then when we talked about having you on the panel, I was like, oh, we have so many questions. We could spend the whole hour just with you. So it was hard to narrow down our questions to just a few here for you. The other one I want to ask you is kind of a follow-up of what we were talking about with Peggy and Carrie, the kind of supports available. I want to know if you're aware of any resources that are specialized to the Native American community. And as a second part of that, what barriers and challenges do Native Americans in Utah face in regards to kinship care?
I wanted to add, in the Native American community, we do have informal kinship placements and formal kinship placements. So the formal ones, have court involvement, and we do see grandparents raising grandchildren, aunts raising nieces and nephews, and so it's a community coming together to support our Native children. Some of the resources that are found across the state of Utah, locally here in Salt Lake County, is the Urban Indian Center of Salt Lake. They offer counseling. There's a youth program. They hold various community events. There is also for health and counseling, there are Sacred Circle, which is operated by the Confederate tribe of the Goshute, for Points Health, which is operated by the Paiute Indian tribe of Utah. And then when I meet with kinship families, I also mentioned that there is grand families available to them. There's also BIA services available to them. And then also they can apply for the specific relative grant through Workforce Services. And then also Utah Foster Care does provide resources to our kinship families, clothing, school supplies. In the past, we've received food box donations and for the holidays, and I was able to do no drop contacts for those families across the states. And so there's different resources, not only for the Native community, but also for non-Native children that are in care. Some of the barriers that we see when talking to families about kinship is the background checks. Sometimes they have old charges. They don't have those legal resources to be able to get those expunged. So there's a barrier with background checks. And then the licensure process. Sometimes the kinship family may have a fear of a caseworker walking through their home and complying with state guidelines. And this trust can be found from historical trauma, maybe someone who's experienced a forced removal, boarding school, and then there's intergenerational transmission of trauma and individual contemporary trauma exposures. And then also to echo what the families have mentioned before is setting boundaries too. Sometimes we find families who have that hard time setting the boundaries. You have a parent maybe struggling with an addiction. How are they able to set the boundaries, and then how that will affect the family relationships? We've also seen that some parents are not prepared on, they don't have the adequate training and feeling that they're not prepared enough to be able to take care of a child that's experienced trauma, or maybe needing higher needs or special education. And then also the reimbursement. kinship reimbursement is not as high as a licensed foster parent. So those are a few of the barriers and resources that we've seen and shared with our families.
Very good. That sounds like a very impressive list of resources, not only for the Native American community, as you mentioned, but for everybody. You've got so many fingers in all the pots of child welfare that you are just an amazing resource yourself, just as far as knowledge about the issues, what's available to help, that kind of thing. Thank you so much for your education about perhaps the different difficulties that Native Americans might face in this issue that I think people just don't realize, they're not aware of. And it's through this kind of education that, to kind of sound cheesy a little bit, it makes the world a better place, honestly, because we come to some level of understanding. It just can only do good. So thank you. I appreciate your answers. Thank you so much. I am going to go back to Judge Howell, if you're willing. And my question for you is about your role in a guardianship case. Now, do you see a lot of these? Do you work a lot with guardianship cases?
I work a lot with uncontested guardianship cases.
Okay, very good. So can you tell me what your role in that is?
Yeah, so specifically one of my assignments, I am the judge assigned to the probate calendar in Utah counties. Utah County is our biggest county in the district. So all of the probate cases, which would include guardianship cases, start out with me in Utah County. And so I handle, every other Monday, I probably handle 10 to 15 guardianship cases.
And what does that mean when you say uncontested?
So guardianship cases can be filed in a couple of different ways, and there is some confusion about which kind of guardianship is best, or what court should a guardianship be filed in. The quickest, cleanest, easiest guardianship is one where the parents of the for guardianship of a minor is one where the parents of the minor consent to the guardianship. Mm-hmm. And if the parents consent to the guardianship, in very often cases with grandparents, there are standard pleadings that can be filed that identify the proposed guardians and parental consents that can be notarized. And if that comes before me and everybody shows up to court and says, yeah, we agree with this, I sign off on it, and it's a done deal. The downside of that, or not downside, but the consequence of that kind of a guardianship is it can also be undone very easy. So if the guardianship is based purely on the consent of the parents, so the court hasn't made a finding that the parents are unfit or that the child is in danger, once a parent withdraws that consent to the guardianship, then the child very shortly thereafter must be returned to the parents. So quickest and cleanest is great sometimes if everybody agrees. However, if there are real questions about a parent's fitness to have the children, proceeding in the district court with an uncontested guardianship may not be the avenue, and may be better to start in the juvenile court through DCFS proceedings or something like that.
I see. Wow, you don't often think about the flip side. You just think, oh, it's uncontested, it's nice and clean, it'll go great. But that's a fascinating and in some ways very unfortunate other side of that.
Yeah, for the cases that come in front of me, on my uncontested, I do have deal with contested guardianships down in Juab and Millard counties, but for the cases that come in front of me in Provo, I don't differentiate between whether I'm dealing with a guardianship of a minor because a kid wants to go to school at a different school than where their parents live, or maybe the child's having some behavioral issues and we want to try living with aunt and uncle or grandma or grandpa, and I don't differentiate between those and a guardianship where the parents might be having their own struggles and maybe they're not capable of handling children right now in their lives. And I don't get into a lot of that on my uncontested calendar. We can, if we need to, we can send that off to the trial calendar, and the trial court can make those decisions. But that's a much more complicated process, and there's a lot more to that.
Yeah. Well, one of my questions for you, kind of follow up, was what is the process for a guardianship case? And you kind of given us a bit of that process. So I appreciate that. Thank you. This is just a kind of a personal question, but if you do see those cases where the parents would like to take the custody back of the children, and yet they're not necessarily particularly fit, in your opinion, is it always hard for you to do that? I guess you have to follow the law, I guess. So. I imagine it's hard to place your personal biases aside and.
There are avenues that can forestall an immediate return of the children to parents that simply want to withdraw their consent. Once a guardianship is in place, the guardianship cannot be undone without a court order. So if there's a guardianship by consent, and then the consent is withdrawn, it's not just an automatic, they can call the police and ask for the police to come give them the kids back or anything like that. It still has to go in front of a judge, and there's still avenues where the guardians can then petition the court to find additional reasons to forestall the return of the children and the continuation of the guardianship. But it does trigger a much more complicated process, and it's not always as easy as saying we'll keep the status quo until it's been sorted out. There's a lot of factors that the court would consider in that kind of a scenario.
Yeah.
Well, how's that for a terrible answer to a complicated question?
Well, it was a very legal answer, but one that I think is really needed, because so many people don't understand the intricacies of the court system, of how the law works, essentially. And I think that is a lot of times a barrier for grandparents maybe who'd like to seek guardianship, but just don't know where to start. And so knowing that there's a process they have to follow, that there's paperwork that has to be filed, is all very helpful. And just to throw a plug in, that's one of the things that grand families can help with, is helping through the guardianship process. And then of course, getting an attorney always is the best advice if you can afford it. So yep. I'm going to head back to our grandparents and ask a question. This one is going to be for both of you, but we'll start with Craig and Deborah. I want to know, as we as the Kinship Coalition, our goal is really to help support and advocate for kinship families and the children in their care. But we sometimes maybe have blind spots as we're professionals, we're working on the other side of it, as far as what is actually needed by the families. And so if you could help us out and let us know, what kind of supports did you need, but that you didn't have?
Emotional support.
Something that you can answer for us?
You don't feel like we got that out?
Do you want to think about it, Craig and Deborah? Or are you ready to answer that right away?
Okay, yeah, we can answer. I just didn't know if they had wanted to start.
Who'd like to start? Peggy and Carrie, are you interested in answering first? Go for it.
I think when it happens, you don't know what you need.
Mhm.
And the fact that they were offering and hitting different avenues with us through grand families, it opened our eyes to the things that we needed to consider and that we needed to do. I felt like I went about it a little bit backwards because I'm getting lost in my thoughts. But anyway, the kids, we told the parents as an incentive, this isn't the end. Get your act together and you can have your kids back. We want you to raise your kids. Your kids want to be with you. So the fact that they can get them back kind of easy was we thought would be an incentive for them to get their act together and be able to raise their kids. But everyone that they talked to told them, you'll never get them back. It's really expensive. And obviously they didn't want to get them back enough to get clean and on top of things.
That's
So
really hard. It sounds like you fell under the old adage of you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so getting some education helped you understand maybe what.
When this all first started, we had things coming from a lot of different areas. The state was saying one thing and, oh, you got to do this. And here's an organization you can hook up with, but you got to do this and you'll get foster care money. You'll do this, blah, blah, blah. So we're whirling all the time. We're trying to see what the needs of the girls are, trying to get them situated in a home and
finalizing it,
looking at their personalities to see who's going to be compatible with who.
Mhm.
And they're all three totally different, as girls will be. But so when we got turned on to grand families, we went into that, and I think with the leadership that they had through their counselors and their a couple of people there, it just kind of helped us navigate through that whole myriad of organizations that's out there. But I don't think any of those really fit with us the best, because we didn't want to throw our girls at counselors and therapists and all that kind of stuff. And, we just wanted to ease into this and just to make our family meld, us meld with them and them with us. And I think that grand families was one of the least invasive, least controlling organizations that we could hook up with and help us get through that whole system.
That's amazing. So it sounds like what you needed most was just education about everything, essentially.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Craig and Deborah, can you answer for us? What kind of supports did you need? And were there any that you just you didn't get?
Yes. I wish there would have been a program around like the Grand's family to help us, because it was like real quick. The kids were basically thrown at us within an hour. And the biggest thing the county did was they let us borrow car seats till we were able to go out and buy them the next day. There was no counseling. We had to come up with questions, we'd have, what's going to happen here. And then it was a home inspection. We had to become licensed foster parents again. We had to become pre-approved for adoption, which our grandchildren are adopted, but we had to go through that the whole home study again, everything, background checks. And it just seemed like instead of helping, it was hindering, but they weren't, it almost seemed like we need another copy of this, and saying, instead of giving us that 5 minutes of saying, well, you know what, guys, breathe, you're doing a good job. And they kept offering us respite. Do you want a respite home to watch your grandchildren so you guys can have time away? I said, no, that's not what families do. So we never accepted that. But like I can say, it was really quick. We didn't have any programs set up back where we're from. that explained kinship, that would help the family going through kinship, like these are some options, here's some therapy, here's some things for the kids, which we kind of went and did on our own. We had told them that we needed therapy for my grandson, and we were at that weekly. They offered to help, so that I think we saw some of the downsides, where we weren't as pushy. We just kind of did what we had to do for the kids. And a lot of people would say, oh, we're not transporting, or we're not doing this. And we just did it because we wanted what was best for the kids. But it did take a toll on us. There was a lot of sleepless nights. At times, Craig and I, not that we were fighting, but we were just looking at each other like, I'm not doing something right. He's not doing something right. It affects the whole family dynamic, including my other children that were just having babies and expected, oh, mom and dad are going to be there. And then it's like, I'm raising 3 babies. So there was kind of like a jealousy issue almost going on as well. So it does affect the whole family dynamic as well as outside the family. Everybody's grateful that you've taken on the children, but in the same turn, it's like, well, now you don't have time for us. Or it was very taxing. I mean, I would recommend someone getting into this. You got to take it day by day. You love them, and you just know that, what you're doing, you're trying to do the best for them and for yourselves. And it's okay if you make a mistake, because everybody makes mistakes. That's some of the things that I've learned from it. I mean, and we enjoy them. We enjoy the little things that they do, but it was scary. Nobody said to us kinship. It was kind of like, will you take them? And then they said, well, you're a kinship family, and now you have to do this, this, and this. So it was scary, a fear. I had a stroke when we had them 2 years in, and I was afraid, oh my gosh, I had the stroke. They might take them. They had no interest, but it was just a lot on our family to go through because we are older. And she did touch on a thing where when you're the grandparents, you can sugar them up, give them candy, send them home. And now it's different. I felt guilty. I felt like they lost their foster parents, or they lost their grandparents. Like we gypped them almost. So that's what's hard.
Yeah.
It's
That's
like
a unique perspective from the kids' point of view, that losing their grandparents
like,
anyway.
well, we don't get the grandparents then. It's like the gifts that come aren't from, Santa. They're from Santa, but you know what? Like, well, where's the parents from our grandparents? So we became that role, which was hard.
Yeah.
But go ahead, Craig, you can say what you.
The other thing I think of too, and again, our situation is a little different because of where we came from.
Yeah.
But I think one of the most important things that I learned is you have to be your grandchildren's advocate.
Yes.
It's up to you to stand up. We actually had to do that in the county where we live. We stood up against the county. We got our own lawyers, and we fought them because we felt they weren't doing right by our grandchildren. And again, we didn't have anything back there like the Grants families to help us. We had nothing to fall back on but our own selves, and making our own mistakes and trying to learn from them in an instant. Like, oh, we did this wrong. Well, we got to do it better 10 minutes from now. And so I think one thing that is very, very fortunate out here is the Grants families, and also that we were put in contact with them to help us even now after the adoption, and little things that are happening that, again, we're looking at as grandparents instead of like the parent role. And Grants families has helped us immensely by doing that. But I think the one thing that could cross the board is you have to stand up for your grandchildren. You have to be their voice. And it is so important to make those kinds of stands.
Yes.
And they'll never see it, they'll never know it. But to me, that's one of the most important things you can do for them.
Yes.
And the love for them is, fight till your last breath, because you're fighting for them and you're fighting for their future and their well-being. And to me, that was so important to do that. And I think being the advocate for them was some of the most important things that we did for
Wow.
them.
So one of the things I've taken away, you've got some really good recommendations from both families here, but one of the things I'm taking away from what you have had to say, Craig and Deborah, is that one of the things you didn't get was maybe just some encouragement that you are doing a good thing and you're doing a good job. And that's a really good reminder for us as child welfare workers, and perhaps for Judge Howell, maybe, to just take a minute to just remember that this is more than just our job of getting people through the system, of getting them, through the home study, through the licensing process, through the guardianship, and maybe to just stop for a moment and see the humanity in it. So I love that. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of people get into perhaps social work and things like that, because they want to work with people. But once you're a cog in the wheel, you tend to forget that as you're going through your day to day. So I really appreciate that advice you've given. That's helpful for both families and for professionals who may be listening with us. Thank you.
If I can add one thing, the biggest thing that I've realized sometimes with all of this going on, even though it's being done for the children are not being heard. That's a big thing of mine. Like these children might be screaming for help. We get them into a program, but then it's lost. We may get to the court system and they're like, okay, well, one's saying this, one's saying that. It's like, I really think I'd love to be able to have a lot more people understand and really listen to the children and what they're saying, as well. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to, but I think this is a good forum, and I think this is something that is important and should continue. Thank you.
For sure. I know, I appreciate that. That's an excellent comment. Thank you. I'm going to go back to Stephanie for one more question for her, and then if we've got time, I'll do one more with Judge Howell. And if there's time after that, I've got one more for the families, but I think we're running real short. So we'll see if we get back to that. But so for Stephanie, you have a very interesting job in that you work both with, Utah foster care. So you're working with foster families, foster parents, and then you're also working in your role as the Native American specialist, doing a lot with kinship care. So I'm curious if you can tell me if there are any biases, and if so, what are they that you've observed in the child welfare community regarding kinship versus stranger foster care? Can you speak to that?
Yes. So what I found is that there's that old-fashioned adoption theory. The kids come into care, have them be adopted, let them not be with family, with kinship. And so we need to keep in mind that the best interest of the child is the first placement should be with family. And that's for every child. And for Native American children, that is the first place of preference under the Indian Child Welfare Act, is family first. The second one would be to place a Native child with a licensed Native foster parent. The third would be someone from a different tribe, and then it would be open to any foster parent. But what we've seen too is just the bias of the social economics. Here you have a foster parent who may be in a home with a white picket fence. This is what we could offer the child, versus this is where the child placing them with the child in a home that may be not on the reservation. So, for example, a couple years ago we were able to follow some Navajo caseworkers to a kinship placement. And we met a grandfather who adopted his grandson. And he was telling us the story of how he came into care of his grandson and how he was able to adopt his grandson. And had not the grandfather had made those steps, the child would have been adopted out of his culture, out of his community. And so this child is thriving. He's living in a hogan, a one-room hogan, no running water or electricity. He's thriving. He's learning dual language, English and Navajo. He's learning the traditions of his grandfather. And so it's, those bias of this, social economics of what people feel like is best for the child. But we need to focus on what is the long term of the child's life, not just what short term of care they're receiving, why they're in care. And then we've heard over and over people being adopted out of their communities, out of, outside of their culture, coming back and wanting to know and reconnect with who they are, where they come from, and making that cultural, connection. So that's why it's really important to try to place, family, kids with kinship family, because they will have that, connection to their community and their culture. And that's why it's, really important. And it's nice to hear the stories too of the kinship families here on this panel, share, what they've gone through and how they're able to take care of their grandchildren. So again, it's, it's important that we try to look to becoming a kinship placement for our kids that are in care.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. That's a really good reminder for everyone, is that, money is great. Money can get you lots of things, but family is better. Family is always going to be better. So thank you. Judge Howell, I've got a question for you. And we may go over a little bit, just a few minutes on time if that's okay, but I want to hit this very last. Based on your experience with perhaps guardianship cases in your court, is there any helpful information or advice that you would give to individuals who are considering petitioning for guardianship?
If you can afford it, get an attorney.
Yes.
The process can be very overwhelming. It's not impossible, but it's these are, especially in a contested situation, these are complicated issues that if you are not represented, will be difficult for you to pursue pro se. And bear in mind that it's not, the system is not designed to be an even playing field between parents and parents of children and grandparents or aunts and uncles or anything like that. The system, we live in a society that values parents' ability to raise their children as they see fit. And we only step in as a society over the objection of the parents when there's preponderance of the evidence that the parents are not providing a safe place for the children. Those sorts of factors, and so if you are in a contested guardianship position, bear in mind the parents will have an attorney. The courts will make sure that they have an attorney, and so having one of yours is very advisable.
That's good advice. I know that a lot of families are facing perhaps money issues, things like that. I know that the Utah State Bar can offer some level of, perhaps free legal services. So we often refer to them.
In the alternative,
yeah,
if you believe that children are being abused, if you believe that children are being neglected or in danger, call DCFS. We have resources available to step in and investigate. Those are not cases I typically deal with. When we hear DCFS, we're talking about juvenile court, and juvenile court judges have juvenile court judges deal with child permanence issues all the time, and parental terminations and all of that. And so if that is necessary, because the parents won't consent to an uncontested guardianship, don't be afraid to go to DCFS. They will take your report. They will investigate the case. They will make their own determination. And there are processes that are very similar to what we deal with on the adult district court level for guardianship in juvenile court. And in juvenile court, when DCFS is involved, DCFS always looks to place children with appropriate relatives when they can. So if you believe your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews are in danger, DCFS will investigate, and they will consider, qualified grandparents, aunts, uncles, etc., as they determine where to place the children if they find that the children are in harm's way.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are a little bit after 7:30 when we're scheduled to end. So we're gonna cut it off right here, but there is one question that I would like to hear an answer from our two grandparent families. But perhaps rather than answering it now, if you wouldn't mind, maybe I'll email you about this later, but answering for us what recommendations you would have for someone who might be faced with the option of becoming a kinship caregiver. And I think we've heard a little bit of that as you've talked, but we would love to be able to post your answers to that question along with this video as we finish out Kinship, National Kinship Month this month, and try to give the word out a little bit about the issues that kinship caregivers face. So we'll follow up with you on that, and hopefully we can get an answer from you for the public who's going to watch this later. Thank you so much for participating, and I'll give it back to Rich.
Okay, thank you, Becky. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists, coalition partners, and thank you to all of you who have joined us on Facebook Live, and to those of you who are watching this recording. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope that you've enjoyed your time with us. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.